tonight. Megan Hamill from the Mayor's Office is going to talk briefly first, and then Kurt Gardner from the Executive Office Managing Environmental Affairs will help fund the project, and then we'll get underway with a more descriptive presentation about the project.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Megan Hamill, Mayor McGee's Chief of Staff, and I'm thrilled to be here today with all of you. This is a really good crowd for our last public meeting. And I just wanted to say a quick hello. The Mayor's hopefully going to stop by between a couple of other things tonight, but he is really enthusiastic about this being completed. And we just wanted to say a quick thank you to Kurt and EEA for funding this study that's being completed, and for the consultant team. We think that this is just such a huge step forward and much needed open space for our waterfront. And we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all of this. So thank you so much for being here.
And I'm also going to be brief. Kurt Gardner, work for Secretary Theoharides at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. As was just mentioned, we're pleased to have been able to sponsor the design work that's taken place here on the waterfront. And we really view this as an opportunity to invest in the future of the city of Lynn, a chance as the waterfront is redeveloped, as the 305 acres between the General Edwards Bridge and the Nahant Causeway are redeveloped, as you start to see projects occurring, to look at the opportunity for those projects as to provide a waterfront promenade. I think that's a primary key feature of the 305 acres in the plan you're going to see. Really want to be able to go from the bridge to the causeway along the water, and to do that and plan for it and build it as the development occurs, and not to try and retrofit it after the fact. Also want to be sure that as this becomes a new neighborhood in the city of Lynn, that there are parks and open space to go with that neighborhood. You'll see other open space that'll be talked about as part of this development. And not only for the people, the future residents and businesses on the waterfront to have that open space, but also for residents of the city as a whole to be able to get across the Lynnway, to access the waterfront, to be able to experience that. Not many cities have the opportunity you have for this sort of access, and we really wanted to be able to provide the professional technical expertise for the city to be able to take advantage of that as development occurs. And I think it's important to also say that this is a planning effort that also is connected to several other things that are underway here in the city of Lynn. First of all, there is an effort to update your harbor plan, municipal harbor plan, in order to get that done as well. Something that is connected to and tied in with this. And there's also a planning exercise underway for the development side of the growth on the waterfront. All those things connected, talked about in the same context. All of those are efforts that the city, the mayor, and the staff have been working on in order to ensure an integrated whole. And we're really, I'm grateful myself to the design team, Brown Richardson Umbrella Landscape Architects, Stantec Engineers, and others for the work that has gone into this. And I'm particularly grateful. This is the third, at least, meeting in this room to gather input from the citizens of Lynn, to gather information on what you wanted to see on the waterfront, what uses were important to you, what design elements ought to be incorporated. There were also several site visits to go out and see the waterfront and make sure that while the design team might think they understand it, it's important to get out, I think, on the waterfront, see these parks, see what's there now, and understand directly while you're out there what the community desires going forward. So this is the last of the public meetings for this plan. We hope that we have taken the suggestions and ideas that we heard from you over the last year or more and successfully incorporated those into the design you see behind you. This is something that will be formally adopted in the somewhat near future by the city of Lynn. And with that, I think I'll stop and say thank you for coming. We're pleased to have been able to sponsor this on behalf of the city, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave to walk you through the Lynn Waterfront Open Space Master Plan.
Thank you, Kurt. Kurt did a really good job of summing up a lot of what we're going to talk about, and today is meant to be the sort of the end of this master planning process. So it's more about showing a lot of the stuff we're showing you've probably seen already, and this is about just kind of recapping the process. discussing some new pieces of it, and also looking at how this master plan is meant to be used going forward. So the big thing we were tasked with was to come up with, as Kurt mentioned, we have a 305-acre area bound by the Linway in the northwest and the harbor on the southeast side. And we were tasked with locating a continuous promenade for from General Edwards Bridge all the way up to Nahant Causeway, as well as locate public parks and destinations, being plazas or other smaller gathering spaces. We also, and all of the, we've been doing this process for almost 2 years now. This is our 4th public meeting, and through all of that process, the ideas that have come out of it, we are trying to locate those ideas physically in space, and that's the part that we're really trying to contribute to this. So I really do hope that these proposals reflect what we've been talking about for the past 2 years. And if they don't, please let us know, but we really hope that they do are a reflection of our discussions. So I'm going to walk briefly through what we have in case you haven't seen this before, and talk a bit how this is meant to be used going forward. So as we might know, we have General Edwards Bridge at the south, and we are locating a promenade for the entire length of the waterfront. We're also looking at trying to build on prior planning efforts that were done, and really trying to make sure that proposals are implementable. And by this I mean the physical land that they're sited on are actually suitable for the things that we're proposing. For example, not requiring major reconfigurations of the roadway, or not requiring the landfill material to be taken off-site and used to a different use. So we're trying to be as realistic as we can with the proposals. And also the second part of that is coming up with design guidelines that the city and the state can use to compel any projects, be them private or public, in the waterfront zone. They have to follow these design guidelines when they build their piece. And their pieces may be different and have different requirements, but the guidelines are meant to be the framework for all these future projects. And this is a master plan, meaning this is not exactly what it will look like in the end. The guidelines help shape it and control it and make it look cohesive, but each site will be designed individually as it goes through. And so it's sort of important. I know you've been doing these master plans for many years, but this will take a long time to be fully built out like this. But it will happen in pieces over time as each landowner constructs or looks for permitting for their piece of land. And that's a really important piece to remember, that this is not fully designed and going to get built tomorrow. This is a process. So quickly, the pieces we have are the South Harbor area, where there is some new residential development happening, or on the table beginning to happen. We have a landfill site. Previously we discussed how this might be a great spot for a future landmark park. This site currently is there's a number of landfills in this area, one of which the cap is failing. It is privately owned, but there is a company involved who is going to fix the cap. They will be raising the height of it with more material, but we have talked with them really closely about making sure that there are accessible routes that will be able to get up towards the top and over the middle if we can. They're aware this is the future plan. This could be a great future park. And a conservation restriction will be put on that piece of land after they're done their work. There is a public process that goes along with their project, which you may be participating in some fashion. We talked about a harborside area. This is probably the most ambitious part in terms of this is a very industrial core of the site. Some ideas here would require National Grid to use their land differently than they're currently using it. So as we talk a little bit later, there are some other discussions with UTIL and Durant Nastis, who are doing the other master plan, and their plans really are quite great in how they accept the industrial core of this waterfront area and work around it and sort of incorporate it into the overall waterfront. We then have the ferry terminal. which is at the end of block. The EDIC of Lynn owns this site. There's hopefully going to be a temporary park there from Beyond Walls in the near term. Long term, it's meant to be a ferry terminal. We're talking about locating a public plaza and a really high-use destination there. There's already development at 254 Linway and a narrow connection to it. They will be building their waterfront promenade and a renovation of Lynn Heritage State Park as well. And then really trying to carve out a link up to the causeway. So as I mentioned, all the ideas and the different uses that we're locating in each of these places was derived from this whole public process. And some of these graphics here represent the outcomes of our written surveys, the online surveys that we had done, and also our discussions informally during and after the meetings. So they reflect some of the ideas and uses you wanted to be able to do on this waterfront. As I mentioned, this is our 4th public meeting. One was at City Hall and 3 were here. And we had a couple site walks, and we've met with a variety of other community groups, business groups, city and state departments to help discuss all of these ideas and try to come up with something that will work for everybody. So I'm going to turn a little bit to the design guidelines, because this is the piece that really matters from this point on, is that this is a document. There are 6 copies back there, which you can look through after we're done. Don't rob them right away. Hopefully you'll get a chance to flip through them. But we don't need them back. They're drafts of this report that has to be still approved. What it shows is a section in there is called Design Guidelines, and this is what the city and the state regulatory departments are going to use to help guide all the developments that are happening from this point onwards. And they set things like road widths, and this is the way you should approach designing your streets. This is a map here showing the existing roads where we have sidewalks where we don't, place where we want to make connections where we don't currently. But the idea is that we improve existing streets that link back into the fabric of the city, and this is what brings people, it's what makes this an extension of the city. But so long as we are careful about how we design the streets, things like putting buildings on the sidewalk edge, not set back behind parking lots. And so these typical sections are in the report that will guide those future projects. The big piece is this promenade. The promenade is really the linking thread of the whole waterfront. And so here, we're imagining this is a typical promenade here will be about 15 to 25 feet wide, which is quite a broad path. It needs to have a specific set of furnishings, so it's a sort of a cohesive and a similar language all along the entire waterfront. So if you're going to build your piece here, and you're building a section of the promenade related to your property, you need to follow these dimensions with these furnishings. That is how this is meant to be used. The promenade will change in character and width as it moves because the context will change. Some are quite wild areas, like South Harbor area. It's, there's a large wetland. It's away from some of the buildings. They'll have a different character than other areas. But as it moves through a really urban park or a more active area, the path should be wider, like 20 to 30 feet wide. And these sections and pictures help describe how we're envisioning this promenade to work. So this sets up some of the physical pieces. And if you remember back in the beginning when we talked about what the current condition of the site is, so much of the coastal edge is in really poor condition, and even some of the land itself is in really poor condition. So there's a lot of erosion happening behind the walls, and as part of that, we need to address that coastal edge, but also look forward and think about resiliency and how we're protecting the inland areas. Althea from our office she's gonna walk through some of the resiliency strategy and the approach that we're taking, which is also recommendations that are in the report, as well as some of how it relates to the planting, which is going to be a key part of any project happening along the waterfront.
Thank you, Dave. So if you grew up in Lynn, you may remember some of the historic storms that Lynn has seen. The blizzard of 1978, also the October 1991 perfect storm. This is a map that shows some historic flooding that's happened in the Lynn area. As you probably remember from the last king tide, there's often flooding coming in from the Saugus River. This is something that's already happening and something that will, in the future, we'll need to plan for more. So one of our sub-consultants, Woods Whole Group, helped us conceptualize what this means. They gave us a group of numbers about how they project sea level rise to affect the Lynn Waterfront. And so we have drawn that here, showing now what sea level, how the sea level currently interacts with the wall as it's built most of the time to about a 10-foot above sea level, 10-foot NABD elevation, 2030, 2050, 2070. So one of the things that is clear, even though these are projections and nobody can tell the future, one of the things that's clear is that we have to outfit the edge of our coasts for change. So one of the things that we'll be doing is working on how, one of the things that we suggested is how we can protect the different types of sea edges and the different types of areas. And the other thing that we're planning for is how to design for stormwater when that occurs. So here in these two sections and in these projects, we have a very urbanized edge that's designed to be flooded. And it's okay if it floods. It's been built to withstand that. In some other places, you might have an edge that is protected but also incorporates plantings into it. So depending on the kind of edge condition we are addressing, we suggested using the whole gamut of ways to address how to protect the edge. So in terms of plantings, that can mean a lot of different things depending on whether you're planting in the tidal zone itself, the inundation zone, where something could get totally covered in salt water, or in the salt spray zone, where it just needs to be able to withstand a little bit of sea winds. If you're a gardener, you might know that most plants don't like to be covered in salt. So this is something that we have to pay attention to when we're thinking about how to plant our public open spaces and how to enrich this urban edge for the public use. So what we have here are some different types of species that could survive and thrive in these different zones depending on the use, depending on the kind of exposure that it has, and how we plan on using these spaces in the future.
Thanks. So, like I said, we're sort of going to want to move through all this and take any questions afterwards about how this is meant to be used. And also, I said there's a bunch of food back there, so we can, be more casual discussions afterwards. Where we're at now is we've produced this document that I mentioned in the back, which includes these design guidelines. This will conclude this open space process, and the next step is for the City of Lynn City Council to formally adopt and approve this document. Once they do that, they still need official regulatory power to actually enforce any private or public projects from needing to use these guidelines. And that's where the separate master plan that's being done by UTIL and Durand and Astis looks at providing the regulatory framework that enables that the ability to compel landowners to follow the guidelines. And one of the methods they're using is the amended harbor plan, amended municipal harbor plan, which allows a city to tweak the standard rules that would apply to developing in what are called filled tidelands, and these are, long before the land we talking about looks like it does now. It used to be much closer inland. The shoreline was much closer inland, and it's been filled in over time. So much of this area is subject to what this rule called Chapter 91, and Chapter 91 triggers state permits, and the municipal harbor plan allows tweaking of those Chapter 91 rules. And it allows us to This was what gets us a much nicer and amplified waterfront area. And so Util, Duran, and Access are coming up with proposals that sort of incorporate and embed all this open space master plan work into their master plan and linking it all together. The other interesting piece that I think might be helpful for everybody to sort of take a look at is how they're envisioning this master plan area to actually be developed and change over time. And the key part is looking at this industrial core where we have a water treatment facility, we have a number of landfills, liquid natural gas tank, electrical facility. So there's a lot of industrial uses. There's also some privately owned industrial uses as well. And this really does make up a big character of the site. And so not shying away from that, because it's not going away anytime soon. But what is happening is that there is some more residential focused developments happening at either end. And these will continue to grow. And as they begin to move towards the industrial core, they're coming up with ideas about how these buffer spaces will work. And that's where you get a lot of different types of mixed uses happening and some interesting things in terms of coming down to the waterfront and experiencing. So this kind of helps map it out. It's done a graphic that helps you see some of the developments that they know of and some that might likely happen in time. So this is sort of a good picture of the physical buildings and how it might unfold, all incorporating these open space proposals. And it all relates back to where we started in the beginning, which was identifying where those key connections were, how you get to the waterfront and how do you move along it, and how and the activities and destinations you get to enjoy once you get there. So this sums up our big overall discussion, and I just want to open up to any questions anybody has. And if you do have a question, please do stand up, because we don't have the microphone out today, so please stand up, and I'll help repeat the question back best I can.
Hi. I'm coming sort of late to the party. This is the first meeting I've attended. So I'm fascinated by the idea of being able to use the landfill, which I may be wrong, but in the summer, there's quite a stench from it as you drive along the Lynn Way. I'm wondering how that is dealt with to create a park. And you said that the core was collapsing or there was a weakness, something that had to be corrected. Can you explain more about that?
Sure, yeah. Did anybody hear that question?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So first, there's 3 landfills, I believe. They're all capped in some fashion.
Does that mean that
meaning that they were intended to be closed
Oh, okay.
and properly covered up. The licenses on some of them are still open, meaning they can still be additional material still permitted to go onto those. The large one, which makes up the center of our site, is this big piece here,
Wow.
is currently capped, which means it has a cover, a liner, there's some soil over it, and right now it looks like grass. But that cap has failed, meaning there's been cracks and erosion in it, and so some of what's underneath it is exposed. I don't believe the material that's in there is garbage as such. A lot of it is fill material, which still has things in it we don't want to be interacting with. But so that's the current state. It needs to be fixed, and as part of that process, they're going to actually bring in more material because that permit is still open to do that.
And what is this material they bring in?
That is generally, now this is where I'm getting a little bit out of my realm here in terms of, because we're not specifically involved in that, I don't know, and that's also not my field of expertise. But generally, I believe it's sort of excavations, you're digging a hole on a city street, the soil that comes out of there.
Oh, okay.
So, but there's more to it than that, and so I shouldn't really go to say before I make mistakes in what I'm explaining.
Okay.
But and yes, there are smells. There's also the water treatment facility down here as well, which is located right here, the water and sewer facility. So that is really very much part of what it's like down there. We have done, our office has done landfill parks in the past, and there are ways to improve that, from the actual landfill itself.
Mm-hmm.
But that is part of that process, and as well, there are other uses down there that are providing a whole other range of other smells. So it's not just going to be one site, and it's hard to say for sure how much you can really stop it out entirely.
Okay, and yet you feel that this would be a public park for people?
Yes, I think there are, this will be a project that has to be looked at in detail at some stage. It's not like, so this is the master plan, this is an idea, here's a location for a park. Landfill parks are feasible, they do work, and there are methods to help alleviate some of those, unsightly and, and smells that come from it. And that would be its own specific problem or process. But as I mentioned, there are other uses down here which we couldn't control even if you did a landfill park. And that means the residential unit that might get built to it also has to experience that as well.
Right.
So there are methods and things can be done, and it will have a, we're working to make sure there's a really substantial cap on it to actually grow plant material. So it will be a process,
Okay.
Just start back there.
Yeah, I also have a question about the park. In the previous municipal harbor plan, there was a site that's now being developed right over here across the Linway. It's the Beacon Chevrolet site. That was set out to be a flagship park
Yep.
in the previous harbor plan. The city gave that up for the sake of this building that I could go on about, but that isn't a park, frankly, at the end of the day. What kind of guarantees are there that this will actually become a park? And then what kind of uses are allowed on a landfill capped park? I know I've asked this question before, but I feel like it bears repeating because we're losing what was a nice ground, not landfill park. And instead we're getting a landfill with no actual plan in place for turning it into something that we can use. And that's currently owned by a number of different owners, if I'm not mistaken, including National Grid, who has a bad track record of coming and cleaning up their sites. So if you could speak to that, I'd really appreciate it.
Right, so first, one, as we mentioned before, we're not involved in the earlier process that led to any decisions about not doing what you're referring to as a park that was meant to be sited here. I did reference in the beginning that some of those earlier proposals in that master plan relied on major transformation and rerouting of roadways. It also assumed the landfill material would be taken away. So there were things in that proposal that we are trying to not repeat in terms of trying to be realistic. But we are keenly aware, this is one of the first conversations we had, was about trying to find a location for a really big feature landmark park. And as we know, we can't just take land and make a park out of it. So we have to do our best job at locating where one could feasibly be sited. The landfill was a clear spot. Like as I mentioned, it will have a conservation restriction placed on it when they're completed with their work, which means that no private development can happen. It can only be used for public access, public good.
The entire green area that you have.
The specific boundaries has to be worked out. Their conservation restriction probably relates to their specific site at the moment, which may not span all the way over to this corner, for example. But having said that, while there is tall hills and slopes here, there is significant areas of the waterfront that are at a flat, lower level. And so looking at this is a really quick plan to show the kinds of things you might be able to do, but there are substantial areas for really good active use. We looked at the soccer field, we show one here. As we get further into it, it may be difficult with the power lines that run through there and some of the other uses, but there are, I think, excellent opportunities for real legitimate public park use. I have not taken a measurement to compare size of flat areas to that other previous park, but this is a much larger area than that original park that was promised takes up.
But the real concern is about whether this then will be protected
Right.
from
So
development, unlike that.
it is, yes, that is part of their license, is a conservation restriction, which ensures that it is protected and no development can happen on it after they're done. And they have a certain lifespan, so how much time they can do work on it. And I don't know if you've been to any of those discussions to hear them talk about the project. There were some public meetings that were related to it. But
Do you say more about that? I paid pretty close attention. I haven't heard anything about the parking.
I think as part of their, Kurt, is one of their licenses required a public meeting?
So they, I'm actually uncertain.
All right, sorry.
So, let me cover a couple of things that Dave's already said, and then I'll get back to that question. So, again, Kirk Gärtner, State's Energy and Environment Office, and let me address a few of those things. First of all, in terms of a guarantee going forward, the intent is to record a conservation restriction that would be basically a permanent protection for the park on the waterfront, signed by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, guarantees that it can't be developed going forward. That's important because it also needs to be, the designated port area needs to be amended in order to accommodate that site, which it can't be without recording of that conservation restriction. So the process is building in, and the conversations with Charter Environmental that has site control for the purpose of the landfill recapping project has been very amenable to that, understands that that's part of the process, has been willing to commit to that going forward. It's built into the permitting mechanisms that have been taking place for the recapping of the landfill. As to the public process that's occurred relative to that, I honestly, I don't know for certain whether there have been public meetings around that, but they have been through permitting at DEP. As you can imagine, capping of a landfill is not something that is done lightly. It's something that has an environmental permitting process to it, and I'm certain we can provide the information on the process that was undertaken, but I do not know exactly the details of what that involved. Turn it back over to Dave.
I've had my hand up for 25
Sorry.
minutes.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Would you like me to stand up? My name's Jeffrey Harrod-Joffer. I'm a resident of Lynn and a member of different committees. So I had a couple of questions, and God love you all and God bless you, and I'm glad you're all here. But if you're not able to answer them, I just appreciate that you say something like, I would rather take this information back and study it a little bit. Okay, I don't want to just have an answer, okay? So they're very serious questions, okay? The first one is that about 2 meetings ago, I had said something they were talking about during the planning of the harbor plan for Lynn, that someone kept saying, what about the 1-bedroom and studio apartments, or what about the apartments we're going to build? And I asked them to go back, the people that were here, and please, if they're able to, study our whole plan about whole families being together, including grandma and grandpa, great-great-grandparents, children, and families, and the planning that everybody, should step back a little bit. Well, this is, they take a good look at this. I've worked with the school department since God knows, and a much older one that could be my grandfather. He said, Jeffrey, no one understands it, but every family in America that doesn't have grandma and grams and great-grandparents and mom and dad and all the family together, as long as the boys behave and, with the grace of God, is a broken family, even if they don't think so. Okay? Well, I'm understand there's 2 parts, and you don't even have to answer me. I'd rather you hold it for thought. So I had asked them to go back and do a study about that before they take any more steps as far as planning the development of the Lynnway, because there's no way that what's being discussed so far, I don't mean the beautiful work you're doing, because it's very good, I know that, but the planning is not conducive yet to what we're talking about all entire large extended families living amongst each other, and putting grandma and gramps out in the woods. There's no way we're going to be able to. That was one, okay? And the other was, didn't want an answer, but LaBose, which came out, but not the new edition, but the one before it, it said that, I'm able to read it a little bit. It says up here that someone is planning on paying their sins and their fines by building a carnival park down on the Lynnway, which is not in the plans of the Coastal Zone Management or the Lynn City Council mapped out for us. So it's a very, very serious problem. I just want you folks to be aware that it was published by a very reputable company. It's not a trash magazine. that they just throw around. It's a real reputable publisher that puts this information up. So the part about Grammy and Gramps, right? I am on a committee with Nahat to close one of the nursing homes, which I've been asked to do. And it's a very serious issue. Half the day I listen to Grandma or Grandpa out.
Can I answer this? So
Well,
a
you
lot
don't
of
have
stuff.
to answer it if you
No,
don't
I
want
know,
to,
but I want to
I'll-
make sure everybody has time to ask other questions too.
Yeah, but I would like you to take that back to your
Absolutely.
fellow that made the
Absolutely we
presentation,
will.
and let him know that I've got so much feedback, and that some of them know me since I'm 2 years old. They
All right.
say, Jeffrey, please remind them that we're not able to do our work if we don't complete this project. We've gone through World War I and World War II without that.
Can I
I'm
ask someone else? Anybody else has
Real
questions?
issue. It's just as important as women's rights. It's the, 1 and 2 in the whole world. How we treat our parents and grandparents.
We don't know anybody in this.
Does anybody else have a question?
I
Yes, Earl,
just,
sorry, you were asking first.
I just had a question, and it comes up now and again, that I'm one of these people who believes we should have a city planner to ensure we always carry forth with our plans, because every time there's a new election, it seems like this plan falls apart under the next administration. So I'm just wondering, when you said this plan will be voted on and accepted by the city council, and then I know it needs regulations to be signed for the park. But once the city council votes on it, does that mean it has some kind of sort of carry over to the law, so that the next mayor can't come along, or the next city council, and say, well, we don't like this plan, so let's start all over again? So it's a little bit about how firm is it outside the regulatory area for the park?
So some concern was, couldn't hear, was the need for this to be voted on by the city council, and how long that permission lasts for, and sort of what effect that actually gives, or power to ensure this doesn't get dropped before the next administration. Is that a decent summing? So the time frame of the municipal harbor plan project, correct me if I'm wrong, is end of summer. Is that still about right? So a certain immediacy to that, which would, if approved, there are things that has to be figured out about that master plan and the approaches that they're taking, but that is intended to happen, this summer, fall. So we have a short time period until that point, and once that happens, that would then solidify it, and it becomes a state-regulated issue at that stage, because it's part of a municipal harbor plan. So I think that sort of addresses how it might change over time.
And how about the mapping of the roads, that aren't so much, I assume that would come with whatever development is established up there?
So there are a few additional roads shown here. Each site would be developed individually and would be coordinated with the city about exactly what road network, if there's a new road required, and that would be a very per project basis. And the city would be largely administering that process.
But once the city council voted on it
Mm-hmm.
and accepted it, does that tie it into making sure this doesn't get changed? I wasn't just speaking of the state, I mean the next mayor and city council.
Right.
Will it
So-
put any emphasis on them that they should stick with this plan or something very similar to it?
So the main outcome of this is the open space locations, the relative size, the relative uses that are happening there, the location and the widths and materials of the promenade, and the locations of our destinations, with a lot of that was responding to existing sites. Internally, the exact street network and the location of the street here or there, that is not dictated by this open space master plan. This is suggesting how the streets should look. And so it would be the responsibility of the city and the permitters to say, listen, you're not building, your buildings are set back 100 foot from the roadway, it's not creating a good street environment. We have guidelines here that show what it should look like. The exact configuration and location of them would be subject for a per site review.
Okay, so the rest of that will depend on whatever development comes up and what the city forces them or doesn't force them to do. basically.
Correct. Someone else have a question?
It's not a question, just, isn't there a park over a landfill in Dorchester Bay?
I believe there is, yes. And Spectral Island's another really large one up in Boston
Yeah.
That's
Harbor, which
beautiful.
we worked on years and years ago. So that's sort of where our background on this and its suitability comes from.
Is there any connection links with the community path of Lynn or the northern strand?
Yes, fortunately, we're working on that as well. So we're very aware of the connections.
What did she say?
Sorry, there's a community path of Lynn, or the northern strand. It's a 5-city long path, which runs, Kurt, I'm going to flood my lines here,
Bike path?
bike path and multi-use path. Revere, was it Everett, Malden, Saugus, and Revere and Lynn?
Everett? Say Everett?
Yeah, in the beginning.
Okay.
Okay. Everett, Malden, Saugus, Revere, Lynn.
Thank you.
That connects through. It ends in Lynn, and there's it's an old rail trail, in fact, that's being used for this. Once it gets to Lynn, after the old rail trail ends, it'll be an on-street portion, and that has been studied by a different consultant team, and we were helping them take it up from there and make it, bring it to site and actually construct it. It links in down Market Street is one of the major on-street portions that comes. So it arrives at the waterfront at that location. And there are some suggestions about how it travels along Linway or where it goes from there. But it will be directly linking into our promenade at that site, or not our opportunity to connect right to it. Yep.
I think there's some work happening on the Linway, and I was just wondering if that was like already connected to anything that you were doing for Lynn?
So probably the Minco connection, Minco development, right, the old Beacon Chevrolet site. Is that
No,
where?
it's like along the, like it's just actually like along the Linway, like right by the middle of the road, like look, it's like the road that's right connected to.
I think that might be the hot school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it could be
I thought maybe there was like already work starting on that or something.
No.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's just it's on the Linway, but it's not okay. So it's apparently not related.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I was getting excited. I was like, oh.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So the promenade, who would be responsible for building it and maintaining it? The property owners or the city or, yeah.
That is a really good question, which I didn't touch on. So it would be constructed by the landowner for their piece. The maintenance of it, at the moment, there is not a overall mechanism to manage the whole of the waterfront. That might be a really good thing to think about. So at the moment, what would happen is it would be constructed and a arrangement will be agreed as part of the permitting process of who maintains it. So example, I think at the 254 Linway development, there is some DCR owned property there. They're building their promenade as part of their project, but they are maintaining it. And they have the permission from DCR to maintain it. So it might be a site-specific solution, but it is a bigger issue about, especially when it comes time for any future landmark park at the landfill, to think bigger about how this is maintained, like a Parks Conservancy or something like that.
Can I ask you how much of the waterfront is now publicly owned versus private?
I don't think I have a graphic here. There probably is one in the report in the back. There is not a whole lot of city or, say, DCR-owned land that genuine public access that you're allowed at any time. DCR owns this fishing pier. They have a small parcel of land at the corner, and the city of Lynn owns a piece of land here. So that is one area where there is public ownership. There are also some easement transfers going on that will give us a connection to the fishing pier. That's one area. The EDIC owns this site here, which is the future ferry terminal. Lynn Heritage State Park is also owned by DCR. DCR also owns the sports park here just over the Nahat boundary. EDIC might have some land holdings in this area, but otherwise it's either public utility owned. National Grid owns a large piece of property in the middle. And everything else is generally privately owned. So this is sort of the nature of waterfront and industrial areas, that the ownership and the land uses are really complex. So that's why the guidelines are meant to help provide that piece of cohesiveness throughout the whole area.
You had said that it's so hard to sort of define the time horizon of this whole process. If you were going to say realistically, we're talking 8 years, or?
I'll speak to what I know, right? And this. Oh yes. Yeah. This question about how long it will take for this to build out, even though I said it'll take a long time, can I put a number to it? And what I do know is that we are helping DCR come up with construction drawings for 2 parcels, which is this South Harbor piece and Lynn Heritage State Park renovations. So we're currently working on those 2 projects. And my last piece was going to be to say there's going to be a public meeting about that. It's not scheduled, but we are working towards coming up with figuring out our budgets and what we can do for our budgets, and then presenting that back to the public. So hopefully sometime this summer that will happen. So those are those 2 pieces I know of. The main co-development here, 254 Linway, is underway. It's permitted and being constructed as we speak. And I'm aware of there's Gearworks development here. There's some potential sites on this part of the site that have the proposals put forth for residential units there. Porthole Restaurant has been also sold and looking to, I believe that's the intended use there, some sort of residential unit. So those are the big residential pieces, and those are, and I wouldn't dare put a number to it, because if I said it'll happen in 2 years, it'd take 7 or more. So 254 Linway is underway. These are being planned. Gorelick Farms is the big site that was sold, I'm sure, or in the process of anyway. Maybe something will happen with that site. They own a fair bit of land in and around the facility, but it's really subject to private development. Does the money work? Can we make the uses work? So it's not what you want, but 20 years?
One thing I don't have a clear idea of is how the land, if it's owned privately, how do you make this project go ahead? Do you have to, how do you convince the landowners to go along with the project?
So we have no power to require a private landowner to do anything with their land.
Okay.
If it's a publicly owned piece of land,
But you just said it was very minimal compared to the entire piece, so.
Tom.
So, the next step is the municipal harbor plan, which is referenced, and that covers all of the land that is subject to Chapter 91 licensing, which is a fairly large part of all of this area. It's mostly private tidelands, which means there aren't a lot of public benefits inherent in those filled tidelands. But with the municipal harbor plan, what we're doing is, I think Dave's work was tweaking the regs to say, no, we need some more public benefits from the private landowners. So anyone that redevelops the property, primarily the 2 largest ones would probably be South Harbor, and if the clock tower property, if this was ever redeveloped, they would have to follow these amplifications, they're called, which would require pretty much implementing what's in the open space master plan. So instead of just a 10-foot wide walkway, you'd have to have benches, lighting, other amenities that are spelled out in the plan in different areas. So there is a way that as part of the licensing process through the state to implement what's shown on this plan.
But is your hope to sort of make this an attractive possibility so that people will decide maybe now's the time for me to develop it? I mean, how do you encourage them to do anything with the land?
Well, there is a lot of, there is the development pressure, or there is proposals for development already. And so that momentum is sort of underway.
So you think that?
And this is meant, the idea is to put this framework in before it gets fully built out and permitted.
Okay.
But also using some of the existing things like City of Lynn or EDIC owned land or DCR owned land is what gets us destinations along the waterfront. And those are projects these different departments really want to do when they get the funding to do it. And so it's setting up that framework and getting us spots to visit along the waterfront and then connecting them when we can.
And where will the ferry be? Is that the Boston ferry you're thinking of? Or?
Well, there's a current ferry dock there, and the hope is there's additional funding for it to keep it going, but it goes to Boston.
Thank you.
Did you have anything else you want to say, Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, I think there's a little bit about what UTL works on with the waterfront master plan. But one of the things that I've heard Matthew from UTL talk about is how a lot of this can be implemented sort of in increments. You don't have to wait for the whole thing. So if there's a development, say at South Harbor, there's a way to create a very walkable loop through some of the streets and make the streets nice, and then along the waterfront. So it's not necessarily all or nothing. It sort of can happen over time.
Should we assume that currently kind of beautiful seawall next to the bridge will be removed and redesigned?
I mean, it's in really poor condition for the purpose.
Well, not all of it, but
Yeah, so we did a pretty solid investigation of up to a certain point here, and this southern piece, there's an awful lot of failure.
okay.
So any projects would have to, it's another sticky issue in terms of ownership.
So that would go back to these designs for the water's edge.
Exactly. So when you're doing that piece, looking ahead, thinking about resiliency, what materials you're using, what height you're building it to, and we're addressing that in our South Harbor project as well.
Thank you.
Kettle Cuisine, are they supposed to have a piece for the promenade for Chapter 91?
Kettle in here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so Tom, you may know the details of their Chapter 91 license.
I think it's a 10-foot wide.
So
I think once
this gets built and the destination.
this was
yeah.
dealt with earlier, but I think once this development is built, they are required to do a 10-foot wide walkway on the seaward side of their property now. So I believe it's pile supported or cantilever.
So they would connect to whatever they're doing for the construction over there?
Yes. So this is where the pieces begin to come together. Is that you end up having a waterfront state from the porthole site all the way through to the future ferry terminal. And you have a piece and a place to go to and actually spend time at. In South Harbor, feeding off the development that's potentially happening down here, providing a loop on existing streets and along the waterfront when they build their portion, and connecting over to the Gearworks development across the Lynn. This is when these pieces begin to happen, and you're not relying on the entire build-out.
I have one more comment.
Can we keep it really brief? Just
Yes,
a couple last
very
comments, and then I want
Very
to
brief.
wrap it up. Yeah.
Jeff, again, one thing is, I know the Gaudette family, and I spoke to one of them directly, one of the owners of title, okay? And that is a forced, okay, I was told, he is not interested in selling the property, and if anyone claimed title to it, under federal law, forcing a sale of property that people don't wish to sell is not legal. So they're going to have to go to litigation, whether they want to or not. And the other part is that, they brought it up at a license board meeting, and Mr. Gaudette, last report, was very happy that they were leaving him alone, and that this is at a license board meeting, and that he was able to have his friends there for coffee only, and that nobody else was entering, okay? But that's where they stand with that. If those people, good, well, I want them to know that that's a violation of federal law, not allowed to force sale of property or somebody under force.
Thank you.
30 seconds, yay.
Honest to God.
The development, absolutely wonderful, looks great, but is there a dredging impact statement that's combined by anybody out there for the harbor? From that end to the other, there's going to be considerable dredging. So at what point?
Sorry, can you say it again? So I'm
Ocean water dredging.
Yeah. Is there a plan?
Is there a plan that combines all of it from one end to the other? Or is it going to become piecemeal as each piece does?
My understanding is that yes, there is a plan to, currently the channel comes in and it ends about here, and there's a plan to connect it to the Saugus River, and I understand that is something that is the city and EDIC are looking forward to actually doing. But I don't know the details of exactly. Are we good? Any other questions? Happy to take any. We'll also be back here and around any other detailed questions you want to ask. But thank you, really thank you so much for